The spring of 1878 brought the worst floods in Colorado Territory's recorded history, and with them came a problem that seemed impossible to solve. The Clearwater River, normally a gentle stream that meandered through the valley between the towns of Millfield and Crossing Creek, had become a raging torrent that swept away the wooden bridge connecting the two communities. That bridge had been more than just a river crossing. It was the lifeline that allowed farmers to get their crops to market, families to visit relatives, and the doctor in Millfield to reach patients in Crossing Creek. Without it, the two towns were as isolated as if they were on different continents. "It'll take months to get a new bridge built," declared Mayor Harrison of Millfield, a portly man who'd grown rich selling supplies to miners. "We'll have to send to Denver for engineers, order materials from back east. Cost a fortune, too." "Months we don't have," replied Sarah Mackenzie, the schoolteacher whose students came from both sides of the river. "Winter comes early in these mountains. If we don't have a bridge by October, Crossing Creek will be cut off completely until spring thaw." The town council meeting was growing heated when the sound of approaching horses interrupted the debate. Through the window, they could see a column of cavalry riding down Main Street. Blue uniforms crisp despite the dust of travel, brass buttons gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Buffalo Soldiers," someone muttered, using the name that Plains Indians had given to the African-American cavalry regiments out of respect for their fighting prowess. The column halted in front of the town hall, and their leader dismounted, a tall, powerfully built man whose bearing spoke of years of military discipline and natural authority. Sergeant First Class Marcus Washington of the 10th Cavalry Regiment had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Afternoon, folks," Marcus said, touching the brim of his campaign hat respectfully. "I'm Sergeant Washington. We're en route to Fort Collins, but we heard you might have some trouble that could use a soldier's attention." Mayor Harrison stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "Appreciate the offer, Sergeant, but this is an engineering problem. We need a bridge built, not whatever it is you cavalry boys do." Marcus smiled, an expression that held both patience and quiet confidence. "With respect, sir, cavalry boys do whatever needs doing. I spent 4 years building bridges, roads, and fortifications during the war, and another 10 doing the same thing out here on the frontier. Mind if I take a look at your problem?" The crowd followed Marcus down to the riverbank, where the twisted remains of the old bridge jutted from the water like broken bones. The Clearwater was still running high and fast, carrying debris from the mountain snowmelt. Most folks took one look at the churning water and shook their heads. It would be suicide to try building anything in that current. But Marcus studied the river with the eye of an engineer, noting the rock formations, the depth of the water, the way the current flowed around the natural obstacles. He pulled out a small notebook and began sketching, his pencil moving with quick, sure strokes. "What do you think, Sergeant?" asked Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the territory's first female physician who'd ridden over from Crossing Creek for the meeting. "Can it be done?" Marcus looked up from his notebook, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Yes, ma'am, it can be done. Won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it can be done." "How?" demanded Harrison. "The current's too strong for wooden pilings, and we can't afford stone." "Don't need stone," Marcus replied. "What we need is engineering. The Romans built bridges that lasted 1,000 years using nothing but wood, rope, and mathematics. I can build you a suspension bridge using local timber and some cable we can order from Denver. It'll be stronger than what you had before, and it'll cost half as much." The crowd murmured with interest, but Harrison remained skeptical. "You're talking about a pretty complicated project, Sergeant. No offense, but do you really think?" He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. Marcus had heard it before. The assumption that a black man, even one wearing sergeant's stripes, couldn't possibly have the education or skill for complex engineering work. "I think," Marcus said quietly, "that I graduated from the Corps of Engineers at West Point in 1867. I think I've built 17 bridges, 43 miles of road, and 6 forts in my 10 years of service. And I think your town needs a bridge, more than it needs to worry about the color of the man building it." Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, her medical bag in one hand and determination in her voice. "Sergeant Washington, if you're willing to take on this project, Crossing Creek will provide whatever support we can. We need that bridge." "So does Millfield," added Sarah Mackenzie. "Our children deserve to go to school together, and our communities deserve to be connected." Marcus nodded, already planning the work ahead. "I'll need 20 men, basic tools, and about 6 weeks. My troop can provide the labor and expertise, but we'll need local help with materials and logistics." "You'll have it," Dr. Hartwell promised, shooting a meaningful look at Mayor Harrison. The work began the next morning. Marcus had his men, 12 seasoned Buffalo soldiers who'd built infrastructure across the frontier, survey the river and begin cutting timber from the surrounding forest. The design he'd sketched was elegant in its simplicity. A suspension bridge, supported by cables, anchored to massive stone foundations on either side of the river. The first challenge was getting those foundations in place. The river was still running too high and fast for conventional construction methods, so Marcus devised an ingenious solution. Using techniques he'd learned building military bridges under fire, he had his men construct a temporary dam upstream, diverting enough water to create a work area. "Never seen anything like it," admitted Tom Bradley, Millfield's blacksmith, who'd volunteered to help with the metalwork. "That sergeant knows what he's doing." But not everyone was impressed. A group of men led by Harrison's brother-in-law, a bitter ex-Confederate named Jeremiah Cobb, made no secret of their opposition to the project. "Waste of time and money," Cobb grumbled to anyone who'd listen. "What's a bunch of colored soldiers know about building bridges? Mark my words, that thing'll collapse the first time someone tries to cross it." The sabotage started small. Tools that went missing, materials that were mysteriously damaged, work that had to be redone because someone had tampered with it overnight. Marcus said nothing, but he posted guards and kept working. The real test came when they began raising the towers that would support the suspension cables. Each tower was 60 feet tall, built from massive timbers that had to be precisely fitted and perfectly vertical. It was dangerous work that required absolute trust between the men handling the ropes and pulleys. On a hot July morning, as Marcus and his men were raising the second tower, one of the support ropes snapped. The massive timber structure began to topple toward the river, threatening to crush 2 soldiers who were working below. Without hesitation, Marcus threw himself against the falling tower, using his own body as a lever to redirect its fall away from his men. The timber crashed harmlessly into the riverbank, but Marcus was pinned beneath a crossbeam, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Sergeant!" shouted Corporal Johnson, rushing to his aid. "Don't move, sir. We'll get you out." As the soldiers worked to free their leader, a crowd gathered from both towns. Dr. Hartwell arrived within minutes, her medical bag ready, but it was clear that Marcus had suffered a serious injury. "Broken leg," she diagnosed after a careful examination. "Clean break, but it'll need time to heal properly. You'll be off your feet for at least 6 weeks." Marcus struggled to sit up, his face pale with pain but his voice steady. "Can't stop now, Doc. We're behind schedule as it is, and winter's coming." "The bridge can wait," Dr. Hartwell said firmly. "Your health is more important." "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the half-completed structure. "These folks need that bridge. My men can finish the work." But Corporal Johnson shook his head. "With respect, Sergeant, we need your engineering knowledge. None of us have the education for the technical parts." It was then that Sarah Mackenzie stepped forward, her schoolteacher's mind already working on the problem. "What if we helped? I studied mathematics at the Colorado Seminary. If you could teach me the engineering principles." Marcus looked at the young woman with new respect. "It's not just mathematics, Miss Mackenzie. It's physics, materials science, structural engineering." "Then teach me," she said simply. "Teach all of us. Make this a community project." And so began the most unusual engineering school in Colorado Territory's history. From his bed in Dr. Hartwell's clinic, Marcus taught anyone who wanted to learn the principles of bridge construction. Sarah Mackenzie proved to have a natural aptitude for mathematics, while Tom Bradley's blacksmith skills translated perfectly to metalworking. Even some of the skeptics, impressed by Marcus's sacrifice for his men, began to volunteer their time and expertise. The work continued through the summer, with Marcus directing from a wheelchair that Dr. Hartwell had ordered from Denver. The bridge took shape slowly but surely, two graceful towers connected by cables that would support a wooden roadway strong enough for loaded wagons. The sabotage continued too, but now it was met by community vigilance. When Jeremiah Cobb and his cronies tried to weaken the cable anchors, they found themselves facing a group of determined townspeople who'd had enough of their interference. "This bridge is being built by good people doing honest work," declared Tom Bradley, his blacksmith's hammer resting meaningfully on his shoulder. "Anyone who's got a problem with that can take it up with me." Cobb and his followers slunk away, their influence broken by the community's newfound unity. The final test came in early October, when the first snows began to dust the mountain peaks. The bridge was complete except for the roadway planking, but a massive storm was approaching, the kind of early blizzard that could shut down work for months. "We need 3 more days," Marcus calculated, studying the weather signs with the skill of a man who'd spent years reading the frontier sky. 3 days to finish the planking and test the structure. "Storm will be here in 2, predicted old Pete, a prospector whose weather predictions were legendary in their accuracy. The entire community mobilized for a final push. Men, women, and children worked side by side, carrying planks, driving nails, and applying the waterproof coating that would protect the wood through the harsh mountain winter. Marcus, his legs still in a cast but his determination undiminished, supervised from a chair positioned at the bridge's center. The snow began falling as they drove the last nail, fat, wet flakes that promised to become a full blizzard within hours. But the bridge was finished, a graceful span of timber and cable that arched across the Clearwater River like a promise kept. "Time for the test," Marcus announced, struggling to his feet with the help of his crutches. The crowd fell silent as Tom Bradley drove his heavily loaded wagon onto the bridge. The structure swayed slightly, exactly as it was designed to do, but held firm. Halfway across, Bradley stopped and looked back at the watching crowd. "Solid as bedrock," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the water. The cheer that went up from both sides of the river could be heard for miles. Families separated for months rushed to embrace relatives. Children who'd been unable to attend school ran laughing through the snow to reach their classroom. Dr. Hartwell made her first house call to Crossing Creek since the spring floods, her medical bag bouncing as her horse trotted confidently across the new bridge. But the real celebration came that evening, when both communities gathered in Millfield's largest building, the grain warehouse, for a feast that had been weeks in the planning. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes, and the air rang with laughter and conversation in 6 languages. Marcus sat at the head table, his crutches propped against his chair, surrounded by the people who'd become more than just another assignment. Mayor Harrison, his skepticism long since replaced by genuine respect, stood to offer a toast. "To Sergeant Marcus Washington and the men of the 10th Cavalry," he said, raising his glass, "who showed us that the best bridges aren't just built of wood and steel, they're built of courage, skill, and the willingness to bring people together." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus raised his hand for quiet. When the room fell silent, he spoke in the clear, carrying voice that had commanded men in battle and directed them in peace. "The bridge we built isn't just mine," he said. "It belongs to all of us, every person who carried a plank, drove a nail, or believed it could be done. But more than that, we built something else here. We built understanding. We built community. We built proof that when people work together, there's no challenge too great to overcome." He paused, his eyes moving across the faces in the crowd, faces that reflected the diversity of the frontier, united now by shared accomplishment. "They call us Buffalo Soldiers," he continued, "and we wear that name with pride. The Plains tribes gave it to us out of respect for our fighting spirit. But I hope that here in Colorado Territory, folks will remember us for something else, for building instead of fighting, for bringing people together instead of driving them apart." The celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared across cultural lines that had seemed insurmountable just months before. Children who'd never played together became fast friends. Adults who'd viewed each other with suspicion discovered common ground in their hopes for the future. Marcus's leg healed over the winter, and by spring he was ready to rejoin his regiment. But the night before the 10th Cavalry was scheduled to move on to their next assignment, he found himself standing on the bridge he'd built, watching the Clearwater River flow peacefully beneath his feet. "Penny for your thoughts, Sergeant," said a familiar voice. Dr. Hartwell approached, her medical bag replaced by a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked from the riverbank. "Just thinking about bridges, Doc," Marcus replied. "How they connect more than just two sides of a river." "This one certainly did," she agreed. "You know, the territorial governor has been asking about you. Seems there are other communities that could use a bridge builder." Marcus smiled, but shook his head. "Appreciate the thought, but I'm a soldier first. My duty is with the regiment." "Of course," Dr. Hartwell said. "But Marcus, may I call you Marcus? What you did here was more than duty. It was leadership of the highest kind." As if summoned by their conversation, people began appearing on the bridge, families taking evening walks, children playing games, couples courting in the gentle spring air. The bridge had become the heart of the combined community, a place where the two towns had truly become one. "You built more than a bridge," Dr. Hartwell observed. "You built hope." The 10th Cavalry rode out the next morning, their blue uniforms bright in the dawn light, their horses stepping proudly as they headed toward their next assignment. But Marcus Washington left behind more than just a bridge. He left a legacy of what was possible when courage, skill, and determination were combined with the willingness to see beyond the color of a man's skin to the content of his character. The bridge stood for 50 years, carrying countless travelers safely across the Clearwater River. When it was finally replaced by a modern steel structure in 1928, the townspeople insisted that a plaque be mounted on the new bridge, honoring the Buffalo Soldier who'd brought their communities together. But Marcus's real monument wasn't made of wood or steel. It was made of the lives he'd touched, the prejudices he'd overcome, and the proof he'd provided that the American frontier was big enough for heroes of every color and background. Years later, when Marcus was an old man living in retirement in Denver, young people would seek him out to hear stories of the frontier days. They'd ask about the famous battles, the Indian Wars, the glory of cavalry charges across the Great Plains. But Marcus would always steer the conversation back to the bridge, to the summer when two communities learned to work together, to the lesson that the greatest victories aren't won with guns and sabers, but with hammers and saws, and the willingness to build something better than what came before. That's what the frontier was really about, he'd tell them, his eyes bright with memory. Not the fighting, but the building, not the conquering, but the connecting. We were all pioneers out there. Black and white, soldier and civilian, man and woman, all of us working to build something new under that big western sky. And in the valley where the Clearwater River flows, where two towns became one through the vision of a Buffalo Soldier engineer, they still tell the story of Marcus Washington and the bridge that connected more than just two sides of a river. They tell it to remind themselves that the best of America has always been found not in division, but in unity. Not in what separates us, but in what brings us together. For in the end, that's what the Wild West was truly about. Not just the individual heroes and their adventures, but the communities they built, the bridges they constructed, and the proof they provided that in America, anyone with courage, skill, and determination could help build a better future for all.